So, this video that you'll be seeing here on my YouTube channel was originally supposed to be going up on my PornHub channel. Specifically, this entire video was supposed to be the first half of the porno video I had shot, where I was talking about relationship dynamics and specifically how devastatingly destructive, very toxic, and depraved social relational dynamics can be for practically everyone involved with them. That was going to be the commentary bit of that video. But I tried uploading that video after having edited it, which, by the way, the filming of said porno took me 3 whole days with a lot of production difficulties, as if you go over and watch it, you will see. And so I tried uploading the full video, which, when it was combined with this, was in total 2 hours and, I believe, 23 minutes long. But then, later in the day today, as I'm filming footage for Exploring Montreal, Part 7, I get an email from PornHub modeling program, their service team, saying that my video has been removed because it violates the community guidelines. And I was like, what? So, yeah, I reviewed the footage. To my understanding, there was nothing in there that actually truly violated the guidelines. Nothing that I could find, at least. And, well, they also failed to specify what part of the content actually violated the regulations. So I tried emailing them, their service team, and they just sent an auto-generated response to me, which did not... I tried getting this issue resolved, and they sent me something in regards to whatever part of the team deals with removing content, in instructional list of how to remove it. And then I sent back, that's not what I asked. My video was removed without my permission. Most likely the second that it went live. And I would like to know what specifically violated the terms of service, so that I could either edit the content, or just, if it was a misflagging of the content, try and just re-upload it as is. And they sent me back the same response. That's how I knew it was auto-generated. Like, it was pre-typed. So, I figured, you know what? I'm not going to let this irritate me more than it is. I have a way, I think I have a way to salvage this. Since I'm assuming whatever violated the community guidelines was in the first half of the video, I'll cut that and upload that to YouTube. Because I am not getting rid of that. At least if I can help it. So, that's what you'll be seeing here. And I will put a similar advisory clip at the beginning of my video on PornHub, so that the continuity makes a little more sense. and just the general context of it all. So, please enjoy the rest of this video, and I would appreciate if you go checked out the video I made on PornHub. Okay. Enjoy. I think that's the closest a bird has ever come to me in my life. Except for maybe one time when I was young. You're back. Oh. They're very trusting. Nice. Oh. This is an interesting advertisement poster to stumble upon. The Ecstasy Girls. Never heard of them and never heard of this pornographic film company. And I have no clue if this is in any relation to that. But, well, you have something else to research before leaving the city. Okay, so I actually managed to find the theater that said films are showing at on the 30th. It's called Cinema L'Amour, if I'm pronouncing that right. And it's actually in the Pledge Mont-Royal district of Montreal. I thought it was going to be in the downtown. Silly me. So, okay. on my YouTube channel for my next part of exploring Montreal, when I actually showcase this area, this will be an interesting pit stop. So, see what comes of that. So, I hope you can forgive a bit of the botched lipstick job. I was going to put it on, well, whilst facing a mirror, but when I was in a bar just a couple of hours ago, well, I forgot to. So I ended up just using my phone camera, but I will give myself some credit. Not the worst job, I think, for, well, just using this to apply it, but nonetheless. So I'm just going to state a few things before I just get into what I want to talk about. So, pretty well, all the clips for this video are the most out of order editing that I will have ever done with any videographic related thing I've ever made. At least in regards to this channel and also my YouTube channel. So yeah, that's gonna be a nightmare. Reason why that is because of both how asininely sporadic the weather has been in terms of shifting. Well, shifting conditions from sun to rain to mass amounts of rain and wind to cold to hot and clouds to no clouds, sunny thunderstorms. So it's been very disruptive. And two, I have not been feeling well recently, mentally, more than usual. If you've gotten accustomed to why I'm even in Montreal right now, if you're accustomed with my content by this point. Well, I'm not going to talk about it now, and I will discuss it on my YouTube channel in a video relatively soon, but not until I've uploaded a few other videos that I want to make. But I will do so before leaving the city of Montreal. I was swung into a bit more of a, well, depressive episode that I haven't had for a long while. I guess it wasn't near as bad as ones I've had in the past. But, well, obviously, it's caused by conscious apathy. So, there's that. Another thing I'll mention is, I believe I briefly talked about it in my first video on this channel, and I've mentioned about in regards to my travel plans on YouTube when I'd like to get moving out of Montreal, Quebec and into Longueuil, Quebec, and I thought I would be able to do so by the first week of August, like August 1st or 2nd. That's when I was initially hoping to leave the city. That's not going to happen. But, you know what, I don't care by this point. It's gonna run the same course as it did for me with Laval. I was originally going to leave Laval and come into here, Montreal, around June, no wait, June, yeah, June 15th. But that didn't end up panning out, and, well, I got here June 23rd, so, oh well. Oh, yes, and the last thing I'll state before I get into further discussion, I now have photos available on my PornHub channel here, so, yeah, you can go ahead and take a look at that. The first section of them is my digraphic models for my scientific proposals, and the others are for, well, I'm sure you can take a wild guess once you see them. And I will also, once I'm done editing and exporting, and then once I upload this video, I will also upload a photo that I just accidentally took whilst applying my lipstick, and I'm surprised by how well it turned out. I don't know what I hit to take the photo. I was setting my phone down, clearly, and it looks like, I'm not gonna lie, it looks like late 2010s post-emo hip-hop, rap rock, fusion album cover. I'm genuinely not kidding. Or maybe R&B influence too. What's typical from most album covers I've seen in those genres. But I just thought it looked rather interesting. So yeah. Anyway, so now I'll just get into what I want to discuss. So in the last video on here, when I was talking about how the ideology of feminism is not the same as misandry, and how the ideology of masculinism is not the same as misogyny. Well, I believe, if I'm recalling correctly, yeah, I mentioned that I was going to talk about something somewhat related to it, in a sense, in the next video, or this topic pertains to it in some way, similar to that. But it's more broadened, I guess I'll say. And that is, well, relationship dynamics. And more so, I guess, in relation here, romantic and sexual relationship dynamics. But as well as this includes platonic relationships too, friendships. As well as, well, bridgeway between platonic and sexual social interactions, well, platonic sexual intimacy. But anyway, so I kind of, just fair warning, I'm going to try and get this point across as best I can, but whilst thinking about making this video, this portion of it, for the last few days, I've kind of been struggling to actually put my thoughts together in a cohesive way that I would like to present it in. So I'll just do what I can. I think it's safe to say that how most people interact socially in the modern world and have predominantly, to some degree or another, interacted with one another for many centuries now, has not been great. Has been very, very toxic and detrimental overall. And if you're coming from my general ideological perspective, that's shouldn't be really a controversial opinion. But in regards to what would be, well, thought of typically in most societies contemporarily as healthy romantic relationship or friendship, or what will be considered a mix of the two, if one was more in a, I believe it's, I'm trying to remember the name of the sexual attraction, the spirosexual essence. Well, what's thought of as being beneficial and well-functioning dynamic in those realms of human intimacy is most often highly problematic. And this can be seen in various, to point to the most, I guess, obvious.
This other side is a step. Other side is a step.
Sorry, hold on. Sorry, just someone was trying to climb off of this little wooden jungle gyms. Oh yeah, by the way, this is what I'm lying on. So, it's just a rope net. Anyway, so what is... let's point to the most obvious manifestation of problematic relationship dynamics, family units. How most often in most cultures, because of both societal trauma and depending on, well, the demographic and traditional practices, some amount of problematic and detrimental cultural practices from decades prior that have formed into a neocultural setting, well, they're very destructive orders. There's a destructive order of operation between, for now, I could talk about the massive ageism that is littered throughout most parental and child dynamics, but right now I'm just going to focus on the parental dynamics between each other. There's there's a lot of ideals by this point, both sides of, let's just go with a more traditional two-partnered parenthood, though in terms of polyamory and polygamy, more exist. But let's just say a two-person dynamic for now. So often, coming from a more traditionalist mindset in most of the world, especially with the high prevalence of patriarchy, sadly, there's this idea that cis men, or really it even bleeds into just for various other gender roles, those who have more of what could be considered a masculine presentation in terms of gender expression and persona, there's this idea still that manifests a lot more subtly, I'd say, overall in the general populace now than it did, say 70 to 75 years ago in the westernized world, as well as what could be considered more of traditional easternized practice. There's more of a subtle form of this idea that men, or those who are more masculine presenting, should be in more opinionative control over decisions in a relationship, or should be the main protector and provider to a family, or should have this overbearingly assertive and authoritative presence to them, especially within a parental unit. Now, again, many of you might be screaming, oh, you're talking more like the 1960s, 70s, 80s, for those of you who are more swung towards more neoliberalism and neoliberal fascism, but you might be thinking that's more dying out. Well, no, it's not. What could be examples of how it manifests subtly? Well, let's say there's a couple with 2 children that's with a cis male father and a cis male mother, who, though in terms of gender identity, the father has a bit more what could be considered, I guess, non-binary characteristics, has a bit more as well femininity to his personality, still has... Okay. Though having this, let's say this couple gets into a dispute. A non-aggressive dispute of any kind. But the mother, who's more overall feminine presenting, differs with the father and basically tries saying, no, I think we should do this for this situation. It seems like it could be better. We should consider it. But the father then just sort of brushes off like, no, that won't work. That won't work. It can't work like that. And it seems that every time, say they're in a dispute like this, for whatever particular situation drums it up, the father is more so apprehensive to the mother's ideas. Whether the mother really, at that moment, whatever they're thinking of, genuinely is a beneficial idea or not. Regardless, they just kind of seem to be, no, I don't think that'll work. Someone else did this, like that. Or they just, overall, aren't really inclined to really actually absorb what the mother has to say. Again, whether they really were critically thinking about it in terms of the idea that she's presenting or not. But yet, the father has a brother who's similar to him in many ways, again in terms of gender orientation. But when presenting basically similar ideas that the mother has for said given situation, where in this regard they have to make a decision, well, overall, the father is more so, okay, I guess maybe that could work, I'm not sure. I mean, me and my wife had discussed it, but I don't know. Maybe we could give it a try. Maybe she was right about that. Now, in that regard, once he's talked to his brother, he acknowledges that his wife said something similar to what they were discussing in terms of the given situation, acknowledges that, and also acknowledges, rightfully so, that she had brought it up. She had given this idea. She had, when they were discussing it, she had talked about that. She had mentioned it and thought that it would be a better idea to do, to try. But the father only seems to, even though giving credit to his wife for having brought this up before and now re-examining her idea brought to the table of what they should probably do for the scenario, they only reevaluated it, or they only often seem to reevaluate it once a more masculine presenting person, or someone who's male, cis male, his brother, let's say, brings it up again or continues to further discuss it or gives the idea, puts it out there, and explains it, but they're more willing to listen. The father is more willing to listen to his brother after he's brought it up than he is his wife, even whilst giving credit. So that would be a subtle manifestation, as far as I'm concerned, of a lack of trust. One that I'm, in this regard, most likely the husband is not consciously readily aware of. It seems to be, now again, psychologically, for whatever reason this is, it's probably more subconscious. But regardless, it's still a problem, as this would be some amount of sexist ideal that they subtly hold. Not maliciously, no, but still this mistrust in the wife. And if it's because, and seemingly, given these scenarios where he's more inclined to listen to those who are more masculine, might be some amount of prejudice towards her femininity in relation to their, well, marital positions. So that would be one example. Now, I'm not going to give another example in that regard specifically, because there's a few others that I want to discuss. So, what's another example of a toxic relationship? Well, I've talked about this quite a bit. More so, I guess I'd say, on my YouTube channel than here, but I've mentioned it on here, how I despise this. The growing favorability especially amongst those of my generation, Gen Z, towards the philosophy of hedonism. And in this regard, more specifically, sexual hedonism. So, there's this ideal that sexuality for an individual is something that is theirs and solely theirs to own, as, well, not own, but it's something that is sacred to them, and rightfully so, but that has really, in the mindset of sexual hedonists, no effect on someone else in terms of how they socially present themselves and interact with others. And that when engaging specifically in sexual acts with a partner or partners, that it's something that each individual solely expresses, that doesn't really affect the other partners, which, as far as I'm concerned, if you can't tell by my tone, is an absolute load of malarkey. And specifically, I've heard this before. I've heard this extensively. I don't, like, when I brought this up specifically to people, is that I don't think you should be judging other people based on how they behave sexually or what they're into in terms of sexual fetishism and just general attraction and kinks and all that sort of thing. For any of you who are nodding your heads in agreement like, yeah, I agree with that. What's wrong with that, Cam? I'm gonna hope that some of you who thought about that a little bit more, because it really, now that I think about this, it really blows me away how people can say that and not really think about that a little bit more. Like, and not, I hope some of you out there watching this realize the problem with that, especially in relation to sex work culture and polyamorous culture in terms of interactions, and just in general in terms of sexuality. I can explain that more in a bit, but I hope many of you out there are smart enough to see the problem with that ideal. I hope so. But anyway, this idea that you shouldn't judge based upon that, and also that it is your own to hold in terms of your sexual expression, and that you just have mutual benefit for everyone who is involved with it, but it's still it only truly affects you, is blatantly not accurate. And specifically, let me paint this picture, I guess. Here's an example. Let's say there are two individuals who have met over social media, a dating or I'll just use the word hookup, hookup site for a night of sexual intimacy. Now, maybe they've talked in regards to talking about their interests, them as people, things of the sort. Maybe they haven't, but regardless, once they actually get to meeting with each other and that was interesting. Group of people walking by, one of them just jumped over one of the beams here, then ran off just underneath another one back towards the group. It's not like that's not a high jump. Okay. Anyway, they meet and they engage in sexual activity. And they do so just solely for the purpose of, well, wanting to have sex, basically. Just solely wanting physical gratification because, hey, they thought it would be fun. Why not? I just hooked up with this person online for one night. Yeah, why not? I want to engage sexually right now, so I'll do so. But did they have any emotional connection to the interaction? No. I just wanted to have sexual intercourse, so what's the problem? I wanted it for myself, and they wanted it, so good deal. Isn't that collectivism? No. No, it's not. Okay. As far as I'm concerned, if you know anything about me by this point, I have this belief psychosexological theory of connective sexual empathy, and in relation to that, I also believe in just sexual connectivity all around. And what that means is having cognitive, emotional care and sensualistic affection for even those that you're just hooking up with. Which, as far as I'm concerned, I'm not coming at this, don't get me wrong, I am not coming at this from the angle of hookup culture, polyamory bad, monogamy good. That's not true in the slightest. I am polyamorous, and I'm sexually platonic. So I am absolutely not coming from that angle in the slightest. But in this regard, this interaction basically is just merely physical. And as far as I'm concerned, that is essentially, in terms of trying to just solely gratify a physical urge, in terms of your physical wants and your psychological desire, trying to gratify sexual arousal, well, in this regard, if you are solely using another person sexually, and I'm saying the word using, not engaging, you are using another person to physically and emotionally gratify just yourself with no concern for, well, not no concern, you may ask, hey, well, what do you want to do here? I want to do something that feels pleasurable for you physically. What do you want? Do you want to do this? You want to try that? Whatever else. Even with that, you are basically, if you're not having any actual emotional depth in this engagement, you're practically using them just as an object, which is true objectification. You're basically just in all essence, you're using them because it's basically like, and especially so if you're like, I see this a lot, I've heard this a lot, especially even from older generations. This is bled down the generational sociocultural line, down the pipeline, in terms of traditions, ideologically. This idea of, oh, I don't want anything serious, I just want like loose dating or like loose sexual interactions. I'm not really looking for anything too intense in terms of romantic passion or vulnerability, emotional vulnerability or anything like that. If you are coming at it from that angle, especially not wanting any emotional vulnerability, like saying like, because, well, I'm sure people would try and spin their words like, oh, no, I didn't mean it like that, or I didn't mean I didn't want them to, if they were having issues, if they couldn't talk to me about it. People will try and double speak, manipulation like that, knowingly or unknowingly. But regardless, this is essentially what it is. What else do you mean by I don't want anything too serious? As if relationship dynamics aren't serious as a human connection. But if you come at a sexual relationship from that angle, you're basically using your partner or partners as nothing more than living sex dolls. I don't know what to tell you. Is if you're saying basically in essence, like, I mean, look at that in ontology. In essence, that is basically telling them, hey, I don't want to know too much about, like, you as a person. I don't want to know all your emotional weaknesses. I don't want to know your, like, every in-depth passion or what really makes you uncomfortable or upset outside of sexual interaction if you're having courtesy of being consentful, not consensual, but consentful, hopefully, at the very least, then it's nothing more than just using a living being as your cum machine, or you're just ejaculation inducer. And that's a really, really toxic and terrible relationship dynamic. And to go back to what I said about how I hope people can see where the whole, I don't think you should be morally taking a high ground in terms of me being a moral realist and a moralist towards people's sexual fetishes and sexual engagements. I'm going to break down your ideology in like three seconds. Like, if you say that, okay, let's say somebody says, like, I don't think that you should be judging people for what they're into, and I would never judge people for what they're into. And I come to you in a conversation, and, well, you say this, and then, 3, 2, 1, I respond with, I'm into children. Or I'm into, unconsentful torture. Like, I'm into choking the life out of dogs. Or I am sexually aroused in an encroachingly sadistic way by kicking homeless people on the streets. I'd like to hear where that ideology goes from there. Good. So, that's a really, really it's a terrible philosophy that's sadly spreading like wildfire. Okay, what's another one? Well, let's go towards a bit of a... Actually, this one, I guess, I'll throw 2 in here. Sort of a mix. Because as far as I'm concerned, and I've talked about this before on my YouTube channel in a video I made when I was still living in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada, last winter, titled... Which one was it in? Well, it was in both. I talked about it in the pros and cons of No Nut November video and talking about over-sexualization / over-fetishization and video of having too much certainty of things, as well as the video after that, is porn better with or without storylines, which I guess I'll quickly state I have made a decision on that. I think they're equally as beneficial. They can be done equally as well. So I was more uncertain in that video. Pornography with a storyline to it, and also pornography without storylines, that is just showcasing solely the intimacy between the actual actors there. Well, all of it would be showing actual intimacy, but both in both formats. But regardless, they both are equally as beneficial as far as I'm concerned in essence. But back on topic here. I talked about this somewhat, of the idea of the difference between over-sexualization and over-fetishization, and a bit of what would be considered over-exotification, and just merely sexualization and fetishization in essence. Because I don't believe that most things just in essence being sexualized or fetishized is a problem. Most average things. Now, yes, I do believe there are things that shouldn't be, that are inherently problematic to, well, do so for. But let's go specifically here with, say, let's say someone is very attracted to two individuals. They're more, well, polysexual in this regard, and also, well, they are polyamorous too in that regard. So, but they see them both as being very highly intelligent people. They're very compassionate towards, both of them are compassionate towards them and each other, and same with the person who is fond of these two individuals. And they think they're very understanding of them, to a point where they that both are understanding of them, and vice versa, to a point where romantically this individual starts falling in love with both of them. In terms of sexual arousal, because of all things listed in terms of both other individuals' personalities and their moral actions towards them overall. But also in terms of physicalities, they are highly attracted to them because of their physiological genders and their cultural aesthetic in terms of their attire and their fashion, as well as their ethnic backgrounds, their racial heritage to some degree. Now, these aren't, the physicalities for them is not the defining factors for why they are romantically and sexually attracted to both of these individuals. But in this regard, it is a part of it. And this would open, just simply this arrangement here, or this scenario I'm drumming up, would open up a very controversial debate of the idea of them being attracted to their cultural or racial background, or specifically in relation to, could be just in relation to their people demographic. Well, this is where the hypocrisy comes in, to a certain extent, but more so it relates to ethnicity in this regard, for what I'm discussing. So, as far as I'm concerned, this scenario is not inherently a detrimental relationship dynamic. Not inherently. And why that is because there will be many who would say this is a problematic view of these two individuals by this one individual who is attracted to them, because it includes the fetishization of their, both, let's just say, their skin color, their cultural dress wear, and maybe to some degree cultural traditions that they practice in. Many would argue that this is detrimental because of it being fetishization of a ethnic background. However, I don't regard it as such, because here's the thing. As far as I'm concerned in sexology, in relation to it, specifically psychosexology, there is evidence for millennia that in relation to people's romantic types and sexualities, what they are attracted to, much of that, in many regards, is based, to some degree, on the cultural background that they have grown up in, because, as far as I'm concerned, in relation to certain things in their childhood, or just things in their general surroundings that have been familiar to them and that they've seen as a welcoming and a pro-social and a comforting social surrounding of people within their specific people group, or if they've been surrounded by another people group in their close interpersonal and also broader societal settings. In this regard, this is one way that sexual desire and sexual attraction can form. One way. And as far as I'm concerned, that is a beneficial means of how it forms, psychosexologically. Another form, this as far as there's only two forms of this, of how sexuality develops. Another form would be societal specifically sexual trauma, traumatization, or something, well, societally becoming accustomed to a very antisocial and destructive viewpoint of another group, or of a specific position in your cultural setting, or things of the sort, or specifically physical and emotional sexual abuse or sexual repression and trauma, in all of it traumatization. So, but going back to just the fetishization of these two individuals, a portion of it being their heritage and their practices. The individual who is doing so is not inherently morally destructive, as far as I'm concerned. Because, let's say this individual was surrounded by the same cultural traditions, or specifically grew up in a familiarized setting with practices or things associated to these two individuals' same or different ethnic backgrounds. And this became something of pleasure to them, something that's subconsciously, consciously and or subconsciously, became an emotionally pleasurable and comforting setting, because of what they had grown up with and become accustomed to. Then, as far as I'm concerned, and in this regard, they do not solely view this, and let's go specifically with their sexual attraction to them. This is not the sole reason for why they are attracted to them, as mentioned before, because of their disposition towards them and their personal characteristics as people, their identities in terms of, and their moral values, how they just socially orient themselves, which obviously is influenced by their cultural backgrounds and societal their communal settings, things of the sort. But regardless, it's not, what I said prior is not the main reason. And so this as far as I'm concerned, this is not something that is objectification, and it's not this detrimental sexualization of these individuals' racial backgrounds. Now, in this regard, talk about what would be detrimental is if this was over-sexualization and over-fetishization. Now, what would that look like exactly? Well, let's say that let's say this individual knows these other two individuals for who they are as people, how they orient themselves, things of the sorts, but are attracted to elements of that, but at the same time, and more so, only either initially and in the immediate only thought about dating them, seeing about becoming partners with both of them. Let's say they are polysexual again. And primarily was only sexually aroused by the fact that they culturally practice and behave in specific traditions that they demonstrate on a daily basis, and because of their aesthetic in terms of fashion and their skin color, and views them in such a way of basically seeing them as this pinnacle of possible sexual or romantic pleasurability because of their ethnic ties and cultural influences, then this is complete over-fetishization, over-sexualization. Because essentially, what this person is doing is seeing these other two individuals' backgrounds and cultural, in that regard, cultural essence, which is a part of who they are, as in totality this erotic idol. Well, that's basically just dumbing down their entire demographic to solely that, as if it's meant to please sexual favor and desire of either, whether or not in relation to the demographic specifically or other demographics in this supremacist sense, solely, which is, as far as I'm concerned, completely disgusting and is dehumanizing. Now, again, psychologically, in terms of sexual attraction, how it develops, or if the presence of, in relation to the presence of psychological disorder, regardless of how this fetishism formed, it's still very clearly morally detrimental. And but in this regard, this would be over exotification and over fetishization of the group, not merely fetishization or sexualization, because in essence, to have this, to basically praise someone for their background or for their physical appearance because of their background, in relation to sexual and romantic dynamics to some degree, and meaning it as a positive as one element, as one part of their entire character, that is to, in essence, sexualize them in some way. And the same goes for sexual attraction to gender, whether it be the opposite, the same, or varied, in relation to heterosexuality, homosexuality, bisexuality, pansexuality, omnisexuality, scoliosexuality, all the rest. In relation to all this, that is essentially to have some sort of sexualizing element to how you perceive another sex or gender identity. So this idea that fetishization and sexualization are inherently destructive to another individual is not true at all, as far as I'm concerned. But obviously, just the same as sexual hedonism is disgusting, most often part of sexual hedonism is very clearly over sexualization, over fetishization. So that's one. Another one. So I think I'll do one more, and then I'll try to cap off this video, well, this portion of the video, in what way I can well enough. So let's say there is let's say there's someone who's in a relationship with someone who has, let's say someone who's of Christian religious background is in a romantic relationship with someone of Hindu religious background. So one partner follows Christianity, the other follows Hinduism. Or at least overall they believe so, even if they morally don't act in the complete dictation of the principles of the religion. But regardless. So oftentimes the partner who is Christian will, in relation to, say, any more serious discussions, or even just so much as interests that they'd like to pursue in terms of their relationship together, will be very complacent and not contrary to what their partner, who is Hindu, would like to pursue. And their partner doesn't, let's say their partner doesn't encourage this. They don't have this domineering, the partner who's Hindu doesn't have this domineering, authoritative grip on the relationship where it's like, no, I've decided that we should do this, and it would be best if you follow. They don't try and coerce them manipulatively in any sort of way like that. So they don't, but at the same time they don't discourage it. They're just more so neutral on it. They're a little bit, maybe say, more anxious, and they're just like, oh, I mean, if you agree with me on this, then okay, I guess we'll do this. But they do actually ask for their Christian partner's input on this, but the Christian partner is more so like, no, whatever you want to do is fine. It's fine. It was a stupid idea, whatever I had thought of anyway. And they're just sort of like, oh, okay then, I guess. But we don't have to. And they're more so like, no, it's okay. Whatever you want to do. But psychologically, in reality, they do have more of a disposition to disagree with what their partner would want to do, but they don't vocalize it, and they are just solely comply and performatively agree with and follow in what their partner wants to do in the relationship. Now, I think you can already tell that this is wildly problematic, as their partner is not being truthful with them. And this is not only, as far as I'm concerned, detrimental for the Christian partner who is denying what they truly desire out of the relationship. This is also detrimental for the Hindu partner because, well, they're acting in ways that they think that their partner is fine with, when in reality they're emotionally uncomfortable with it. But they've internalized their true desires for this, and they don't share it. Now, you might be wondering, okay, Cam, well, why do you specifically label them in terms of their spiritualities? One following Hinduism and the other following Christianity. Well, because the Christian partner grew up in more of the performative activism era, and the mass societal spread of neoliberalism, and specifically neoliberal fascism, but in terms of right-wing ideology, but in terms of far left-wing ideology, far leftism, with what would be called wokeism, or the idea of wokeness, I guess it would be called, into, or more just alt-leftism. And this is, in both these regards, as far as I'm concerned, they're totalitarian extremes. They're very authoritarian extremes, both of them, both these ideologies. But they are widespread, nonetheless, and part of their ideals, moral values, as far as I'm concerned, is this idea of absolute conformity and this harsh alienative punishment, social isolation of those who are not for the so-called, not truthful, but so-called liberation of those the ideology is fighting to protect. Various people groups, various demographics, all in terms of neoliberal fascism, completely performative, and in terms of wokeism, completely extremist and highly reactionary, and not as far as I'm concerned, me being rising leftist, I agree with many of far left ideals for what would, in terms of demographic protection and liberation, what they would be, but not their methods of enactment and protest. But regardless, they grow up in this era, and it has mass effect on those in their interpersonal life who heavily agree with the ideologies, a mix. Let's say they're surrounded by, interpersonally, a mix of the two. And this instills heavy anxiousness in them, an anxiety disorder, internalized. And this causes them to, say, in relation to someone like their partner, who is of a predominantly worldwide a disparaged group under white supremacist and Christian supremacist suppression. Well, this instills this fear in them of disagreeing with provably genuine issues that they are having, whether in relation to their partner's actual engagements because of their religion or not. This causes this idea that, it instills this idea that this person, because of their religious identity, is absolutely correct and basically infallible, which is absolutely not true. The same goes for every demographic on the planet. That is absolutely not true. But regardless, this happens. This is how this person develops. Why they solely agree with their partner on practically everything, even when they're clearly uncomfortable. And this is another, example of a detrimental relationship dynamic. So, okay. I think I've given enough examples here. What's the main point with this? You might be asking. Well, the main point with this for me, I guess, would just be, as I've been trying to piece together myself, but a way I could word this, but I really don't have much other way to word it other than, well, people need to be more pro-social and proactive with how they orient their relationship statuses. Romantic, sexual, and platonic, all of them. There's this, it's so heavily destructive. The anti-collectivist rhetoric that this world, as it is now, has spread, that it affects every walk of life. And this idea that someone in a relationship is superior, or that someone is an object, that someone is a holier than thou saint, an inferior member of the relationship, is all highly depraved. Relationships, as far as I'm concerned, need to operate just solely on a basis of equalization. For each person's individualistic wants out of it. And as far as I'm concerned in relation to empathic compassion, you need to have the humanistic I think people need to learn to develop humanistic connections to one another for all these relationships in all forms that they present in terms of, well, beneficial forms, as far as I'm concerned. Because without that, it destroys humanity and our actual human biological nature. And especially, if you can't tell, with regards to doing something like this, pornography, all the same. But I think that's where I'll leave it for now. So, okay. Yeah. Enjoy the rest of the clips after this, and I hope you learned something. It is surprisingly cold out now. The temperature is, talking about earlier, sporadic weather shifts. Well, the temperature was maybe lukewarm earlier because of the, slight haze and slight rain drizzle. Well, it's pretty cold now for late July in southern Quebec, Canada. Like, burr. Okay, enjoy the rest of this.